Did you notice that the crib that Gemma was taking apart in the finale in the Cold Harbor room was the same crib that Mark was building back in episode 7? There's a lot more to break down in this finale, like what's going to happen to Gemma in season 3. And the way that TV's been going lately, it's going to be at least a couple of years before we get season 3 of Severance. So let's start by breaking down the biggest question of the finale. Where exactly are Mark and Helly are running off to? And what is going to happen to them next season? Because if you remember, Miss Cobell told Mark earlier in the episode that there would be no honeymoon ending for him and Helly R. And this entire episode kind of reinforced that idea. The fact that even Helly R told Mark that she's still Helena Eagan, I think means that it is almost impossible for them to be together, which I think Mark S knows. But the moment he saw Gemma and not Miss Casey outside the severed floor, I believe Mark realized that he had no feelings for Gemma. While Miss Casey was his friend, he effectively sacrificed Miss Casey for Gemma. By the time he heard Helly R, he realized that he could not sacrifice the woman he loves for his Audi, which is why I think he decided to run off with Helly R back into the Lumen offices. I do think though that because Helly's father Jame Eagan sees Kier in Helly R, he's not going to let her die. Since he admitted this episode that he hates his actual daughter Helena Eagan, but we're gonna get into that a little later in the video because I have a theory on why Jame Eagan wanted to create Cold Harbor in the first place. I think the conversation that he had with Helly R in this episode kind of confirmed my theory. But before we get into that, what is going to happen with Gemma? I think that if she doesn't leave right away and get out of Lumen, aren't they just going to catch her again? I do remember Dr. Maurer was chasing her and Audi Mark from the export hall floor when they escaped from the Cold Harbor room. Also, the emergency lights and sirens are still going on the floor, putting the building security on high alert, which I think would mean that if she doesn't escape now, we're back at square one. The difference, however, is that Cold Harbor was completed, and I think it worked. Because when Gemma was in the Cold Harbor room, she felt nothing as she took apart the crib. Both Dr. Maurer and Jame Eagan were watching her live as she took it apart. That was the same crib that Audi Mark bought for them when they first wanted to try and have a baby. If you remember back in episode 7 of this season, the whole reason that Lumen got their hands on Gemma in the first place was because of the baby crib that Mark brought from Lumen, which then made them try to have a baby, and when Gemma had a miscarriage, they sought out fertility treatment. That was the first time that Dr. Maurer met Gemma. That whole interaction, it was almost as though it was set up to get her into Lumen's control. They have had her trapped for 2 years now. It's almost like how YouTube has me trapped in every video reminding you guys to please click the subscribe button. We also can't forget what Dr. Maurer told Gemma and Mark before the export hall elevator closed. You'll kill them all! What do you think he means by that? Cause me, I think he means that if Mark and Gemma escape Lumen and continue with their plan, that everything any Mark feared would happen will happen. They would end up exposing Lumen to the world, which would force the company to shut down. It would shut down the whole Severance program. With the Severance program shut down, it would mean that every severed employee would be essentially killed. If we look a little further past what any Mark was focused on, which was just his severed floor, I don't know if you guys remember in the first episode of this season, when any Mark came back to the severed floor after season 1, he had an entire new team that had replaced his OG team. That's also when we first met Miss Huang, who I think will be back next season. But the reason I bring up Mark's team from the first episode is because that is also when we learned about the other Lumen offices all around the world, with millions of severed employees all around the world. Remember Dario from the first episode who was brought in from Latin America? And even the presentation that Mr. Milchek gave the OG Refiner team when they finally came back, we saw in that video that they were watching, it was multiple Lumen offices in multiple countries. If Lumen is shut down, all those severed employees are shut down with them, Irving style, which I believe is what Dr. Maurer was warning them about. He could also be talking about the 24 different severed consciousness that the MDR floor created for Gemma over the past 2 years. We can't forget that Dr. Maurer is in love with Gemma, and I think he's in love with all of her different personalities in his own sick and twisted way. We saw him in episode 7 be a part of every room that she went into, trying to be as close to her as possible. If Gemma leaves with Mark and they never return, that means he not only loses just Gemma, but the 24 different severed versions of her, which outside of the Miss Casey version, all those Gemmas only know one person, and I think that one person is Dr. Mauer. Since they only exist in those rooms, they only know one person. It also seems that even though Dr. Mauer spent all that time with the 24 different versions of Gemma, each one of them representing a different temperament. Since we found out Miss Cobell created Severance in episode 8 of this season, she has been giving us more and more information on Cold Harbor. In this episode, Miss Cobell explained to Any Mark that the numbers he sees on the screen when he's doing his micro data refinement work represents Gemma's tempers, her feelings, and her emotions. The reason that's important to Dr. Mauer was because we know the numbers invoke emotions from within the refiners, and that emotion is usually the temper they are working on. Dr. Mauer, who claims to love Gemma, has her write thank you letters in one of her worst feeling tempers. But we learned in episode 7 during a flashback with Mark and Gemma that Gemma hates writing thank you letters, showing that even though he spent all that time with Gemma, Dr. Mauer never truly knew her, even though he doesn't want her to leave and kill all the other severed consciousness of hers. But I think he might just be talking about the millions of severed employees all around the world. Can we talk about how we don't actually know how many Lumen employees are on the severed floor where Mark works on? Because the way the season ended for Mr. Milchek was he was facing down an entire marching band of severed employees being led by Dylan. I think based on Heliar's speech to them about fighting for half the life they're given, that all these people in the marching band are severed employees. Last season, we found out that the O&D department was filled with several severed employees. Even earlier this season, when Mark S. and Helena found Lorne and the mammalian goat floor, it seems that there are at least hundreds, if not thousands of Lumen employees on the severed floor of just Mark's building. And I don't think Mr. Milchek is going to have to fight through all of them. I do think, though, that Mr. Milchek is going to get a promotion next season since Drummond is dead, and despite everything that has happened this season and in the finale, Milchek actually still did his job. Mr. Milchek got Cold Harbor completed, which is where I think Jame Eagan comes in. What if Jame Eagan wanted Cold Harbor so that he could put Kier inside of Gemma's body? Because he told Helly R this episode that he used to see Kier in his daughter Helena, but as she grew up, she lost it, which is why he lost his love for her. I don't know if you caught it, but he admitted to having illegitimate kids, which means that Gemma could still be his daughter, since he did take special interest in watching her to make sure that Cold Harbor worked on her. But I think more specifically, he said he saw Kier inside of Helly R, but he doesn't see it inside of her Audi Helena, which I think means that you can lose it in your Audi but gain it again if you become an innie, which I think kind of ties into the conversation Bert, Irving, and Fields were having earlier in this season about your any going to heaven while your Audi may not. I think all that ties in together. So I think he wants to put Kier inside of Gemma once Cold Harbor was successful, giving her a blank consciousness that he could mold into the perfect daughter, his successor to inherit Kier's will. Since the entirety of the Lumen Foundation was based on deifying Kier, I do like how Mr. Milchek pointed out this episode though, that the animatronic Kier that was in the MDR floor was 5 inches taller than the actual Kier, which almost confirms to us that most of the Kier legends are now lies and embellishments to make him seem greater than he is. I think we kind of knew that once we saw where Miss Cobell grew up and found out that they stole her Severance formula, but because Lumen is so powerful, I don't think Jame Eagan wants to lose Helly R because he can see Kier in her. So I think in season 3 of Severance, we might spend a bulk of it inside of the severed floor, since if Mark leaves the severed floor and somehow Gemma got out of Lumen, Mark is never going to Lumen and he will expose them for what they did to him and his wife. So I don't think that's something any Mark would want to happen, as it would also undermine his entire choices in this finale. I do think they may bring back Miss Cobell to the MDR floor. Since reintegration is possible, they may try to find a solution where they can reintegrate not just Mark, but Helly R with Helena so that Jame Eagan can have his daughter that he sees Kier in. Because if you think about it, his entire thing could be about him passing on Kier to his daughter. So if it's possible to take reintegration and put Helena through it, that's one way that she can live. And if Mark goes through his reintegration, knowing that Helena's alive, I think might be enough for him. And it's not just Mark or Helly R, but I also think that Dylan will get reintegrated as well, so that his Audi and his Innie can merge to be the type of man his wife loves and his Audi strives to be. But that's just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the finale, as well as what do you think will happen next season. Let me know in the comment section below. And guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe button, and until next time, peace.